Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a blue-black draw-go style control deck, meaning we've got a lot of instants in our deck, so we can draw a card for the turn, play a land and then say go, and during the opponent's turn either use a card draw spell, a removal spell or a counter spell, depending on what our opponent does. So let's take a look at the entire deck here. Starting out with a single copy of Dispel, a cheap counterspell that can counter opposing instants, so this is good at protecting our few win conditions and can also be used to counter opposing counterspells for just 1 mana. So a pretty versatile card, but does not always have a lot of targets if the opponents are playing more creature-based decks. We've got Jace Vryn's Prodigy, which is great in a deck full of instants and sorceries. Can flip pretty quickly and provide a lot of card advantage or help us control the board. Then another win condition is Thing in the Ice, which comes into play with 4 ice counters. Whenever we play an instant or sorcery, we can remove an ice counter, and when we remove all of them, we get Awoken Horror, which also bounces non-horror creatures and can also finish the game. Got Telling Time for 2 mana, instant speed card selection, can help us find more lands if we need those or find a particular answer for a situation. So just a nice card to play on the opponent's end step if we've got 2 spare mana that we can use. We've got Grasp of Darkness, a nice efficient removal spell for double black, giving -4/-4 to a creature until end of turn, so good at killing opposing vehicles like Smuggler's Copter. Then we've got 2 copies of Imprisoned in the Moon, which is one of the few non-instant speed removal spells in the deck, and it can enchant a creature, land or planeswalker, so this is one of the few ways we have in blue-black to permanently answer opposing planeswalkers that have resolved, so this is a nice way of doing that, although we are turning that permanent into a land essentially that makes colorless mana, so it's not a great answer, but we'll take it in these colors. Then we get to some of our counter spells, 2 copies of Scatter to the Winds with the upside of having Awaken. We've got Broken Concentration with Madness if we happen to discard it to a Jace, for example. Then 2 copies of Essence Extraction, which is great against burn decks and aggressive decks, dealing 3 damage to a creature and gaining some life. Then another removal spell in Murder. Instant speed destroys any target creature. Some more counter spells here, 1 copy of Insidious Will, 4 mana to either counterspell, choose new targets for target spell, or copy target instant or sorcery. So pretty versatile, can be pretty nice if the opponent tries to kill one of our things in the ice, for example, with a removal spell, and we can just redirect it to one of the opponent's creatures. And there's a few other sweet scenarios where Insidious Will is going to be pretty great. Then 3 copies of Glimmer of Genius, which for 4 mana lets us scry 2 and then draw 2 cards. The energy is nice, but it's not like we're really using energy in our deck, but just scry 2 and draw 2 is already better than previous iterations of these kinds of cards that we got in Magic Duels, so happy to have the scry 2 as a bonus. Then if we need a reset button, we've got 2 copies of Languish, which can take care of multiple creatures at once. We've got Disciple of the Ring as another nice win condition that can use our graveyard as a resource, exiling instants and sorceries to either manage the board or make the Disciple larger. So pretty difficult for the opponent to get rid of this once it resolves and we have a few spare mana and a few cards in the graveyard. We've got another inevitability kind of late game card in Tamiyo's Journal, which is an artifact for 5 mana that lets us investigate at the beginning of our upkeep each turn, so we get a clue token that we can sacrifice for 2 mana to draw a card, and we can also generate a bunch of clues and then sacrifice 3 of them to search our library for any card and put it into our hand, so this can find some of our specific answers if we need those. Otherwise, it can just provide lots of card advantage. And it also works very nicely with the next card, Confirm Suspicions, which is a counterspell that also lets us investigate 3 times, so we get 3 clue tokens. So if we do have Tamiyo's Journal in play, we can just sacrifice those clues right away to get another card that we want. Then we've got Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, another way to draw extra cards every turn or manage the board. We've got Ob Nixilis, which also draws us extra cards and manages creatures. And then finally another very nice addition from Kaladesh is Torrrential Gearhulk for 6 mana, a 5/6 with flash that lets us cast an instant from our graveyard without paying its mana cost. So we can get a counterspell, a removal spell, or a card draw spell for free, besides getting a nice 5/6 creature that can close out the game. Then our mana base, pretty simple, 9 islands, 8 swamps, 2 Sunken Hollow, 2 Drowned Catacomb, and then also the full 4 Submerged Boneyard, because we do have a lot of double black and double blue cards in the deck that we want to cast on time. And no room for colorless value lands, unfortunately. So that's the deck, and now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks acceptable. Do need a second black for Essence Extraction, but we've got Thing in the Eyes, plus Telling Time can help us find the second black source. And then we've also got Glimmer of Genius to draw some extra cards. So it looks pretty solid. If the opponent has removal right away for Thing in the Eyes, that's unfortunate. Also kind of want to draw a counterspell at some point to deal with cards like Planeswalkers, that can be an issue. Alright, so I think we lead with Thing in the Eyes. Puts a lot of pressure on the opponent, they can't answer it for single red unless they have a Lightning Axe. So this kind of forces the opponent to maybe spend some resources dealing with Thing in the Eyes, and that way it gives us time to resolve our card draw spells. Alright, so Imprisoned in the Moon is an answer to Planeswalkers, so now we can just play an island, say go, represent a counterspell. If the opponent doesn't do anything, we can just Telling Time end of turn. But it's not like we have a counterspell currently, so Telling Time is our only play. Could have fired it off main phase to try and maybe find a tap land that we can play that turn, but representing a counterspell also has some value. So Telling Time end of turn, remove an ice counter and try to hit some lands here. Alright, so Concentration and Boneyard are both good. So now we have a counterspell and we have double black starting next turn. So now we can sit on our Concentration. So is the opponent... Alright, they're going for Artificer's Epiphany, so draw to discard. I'm not gonna counter that. It's not really card advantage if they're discarding one. And I would rather keep the Concentration for a more problematic card. So it looks like our opponent's also some sort of control deck here. So happy to have cards like Glimmer of Genius in hand. The removal spells are probably not gonna be great. 4 mana for the opponent. And they're just gonna say go. Alright, that's fine. Another Thing in the Eyes. I don't think we play that here, since then we get owned by a Languish. So I'm just gonna say go, and plan is to Glimmer end of turn, unless the opponent forces us to do something else. So this game's probably gonna take a while, unless we can steal it with a quick Thing in the Eyes transformation that the opponent can't deal with. So they play a land, they say go, we Glimmer. Could see a removal spell on the Thing in the Eyes here. Alright, so Scatter is nice, and a land is also good. So I think I'll just take both. Wanna keep hitting land drops. And I guess I'll go with the Swamp here. Still no real need to play out a second Thing in the Eyes. Opponent casts Read the Bones, that's fine. Also just a card draw spell. This does give the opponent an extra card, but I want to keep the counter spells for actual threats or problematic cards. Fumarole for the opponent, alright, that's a way that they can start attacking us maybe. Unfortunately don't have a card draw spell end of turn here, but that's fine. Opponent has to discard 2 hand size, so this will kind of tell us what the opponent might be holding in their hand. If they discard a land, they might be a bit flooded. If they discard... Alright, I see, they discarded a Rise from the Tides, so they might have another copy in hand. Good to know. We drew a Jace, which is nice, so we can play a Jace and still keep up 1 counterspell. It's not as great as keeping up 2 counterspells here. So I could see just saying go and not even casting the Jace. That way we can keep up 2 counterspells and also flip Thing in the Ice. Can even cast an Essence Extraction on our own Thing in the Ice just to use an instant. While if we play Jace here, if our opponent goes Languish plus counterspell for our counterspell, then that's not great for us. I think we just say go here, wait until we find some more land so we can play Jace and keep up 2 counterspells. And we also don't have a lot of cards in the graveyard yet, so Jace is not gonna flip right away. So let's see if our opponent makes a move here, or if they're just gonna keep saying go. So they could have maybe a Torrrential Gearhulk. There are some other big scary cards our opponent could have at this point. Also our opponent showed us Spell Shrivel, so if we get enough lands to pay 4, then the opponent's Spell Shrivels become a lot worse. Another Read the Bones from the opponent, that's fine. So unfortunately we can't use Essence Extraction on the opponent. It does have to target a creature, and I don't want to target Thing in the Ice because then a cheap burn spell from the opponent can finish off the Thing in the Ice. Opponent has to discard 2 hand size, yet again, discard the Radiant Flames. Now we drew an Ob Nixilis, which is not ideal. Would rather have had another land here. Again, I think it's still best to keep up 2 counterspells. But then we have to discard a card here. Might be the Essence Extraction. If we try and resolve Ob Nixilis, our opponent probably counters it, then kills our Thing in the Ice, and then we're in trouble. If we go for another creature, then we can't keep up 2 counterspells. So then if our opponent has Sweeper plus counter, that's bad again. So I think we just have to say go. And I think we discard the Essence Extraction here. Even though it could have been used on our Thing in the Ice just to remove a counter and gain some life. While we can't really use a Murder. Opponent does hit more lands, which is not great for us. Say go. Alright, Confirm Suspicions at least is a nice one if we can resolve it. So here I think, let's see, maybe we've reached a point where we're kind of forced to use a Jace, but I mean our opponent likely has a way to answer it. And same with another Thing in the Ice. But what are we discarding at this point? Maybe the Murder? Maybe the Imprisoned in the Moon? Or we can just play the Jace. Alright, let's play the Jace and probably get it killed end of turn, which is fine, I guess. Alright, Fiery Impulse, that's fine. And Telling Time is also fine. So now the opponent's got a lot of cards in their graveyard, so if they have another Rise from the Tides, we are forced to counter it. Don't have Confirm Suspicions up, unfortunately, now. Yeah, so our best draw here would probably be something like a Telling Time, just a cheap way to remove another counter from Thing in the Ice, or just more lands. So our opponent with a Pia and Kiran Alar. I don't think we care about that too much, since we can just murder the Pia and Kiran, and then when Thing in the Ice transforms, we can deal with the Thopters. So if we try and use it now, our opponent might have a Disintegration to kill the Thing in the Ice. I guess we can just go for the murder now, and then next turn play another Thing in the Ice if this one dies. So let's see if the opponent maybe wants to sacrifice a Thopter, or if they want to kill our Thing in the Ice right away. Alright, they have a murder. That's fine. Now our opponent does have 2 Thopters in play, which can start applying some pressure. Alright, we found a Glimmer. So I think we just play Thing in the Ice, say go, and end of turn Glimmer. And we might see a Disintegration on the Thing in the Ice then. Unless our opponent wants to force a win condition here and protect it with a counterspell. Instead it's another Read the Bones. So that's the third one. Opponent has a lot of lands, a lot more than we do. So at some point they might be able to turn that into a board advantage by being able to cast multiple spells in the same turn. So we get hit for 2. And end of turn, I think we're forced to Glimmer here. Alright, opponent's gonna use a Spell Shrivel on that, that's fine. A Languish, that's not really what we need here. Think we're forced to say go. Keep taking some hits from these Thopters. I don't think trying to resolve Ob Nixilis is gonna accomplish much. So we have to find an answer to the Thopters at some point. Alright, opponent with an Ob Nixilis, so we could try and confirm suspicions, but if our opponent then has a counterspell, our opponent has Ob Nixilis in play that kills our thing, so I think it's safer to use a counterspell and have a second counterspell up. Now I think it's safe to use the other scatter, and it doesn't really matter what we counter. We could counter their counter or the Ob Nixilis. That resolves. One more counter on the Thing in the Ice. Opponent now used 2 Spell Shrivels. And yeah. So I think now we just sit on this Confirm Suspicions and hope that can counter perhaps a Rise from the Tides from the opponents. We also have a Languish to answer that. And Thing in the Ice transforming would also bounce all the tokens. So we could use this window to try and resolve Ob Nixilis. The opponent could then animate Wandering Fumarole and use it to Thopters to attack Ob Nixilis, which would be at 6 loyalty. So yeah, that's not even that good for us. I think we just say go here. Opponent has a Telling Time, end of turn. So we could Suspicions this. Bounce the 2 Thopters. Actually don't hate that. Because now we can also sacrifice one of the clues. And if the opponent does have a Rise from the Tides, we do have an answer in Languish. And our Thing in the Ice won't die to the Languish. Should have maybe kept up double black here to represent Grasp of Darkness. Another Fumarole. Opponent 1 card in hand. And we're gonna sack a clue. Alright, so I think we can start by attacking. And then we can go Ob Nixilis plus Imprisoned. Opponent is on a 2-turn clock from the Thing in the Eyes, now they're at 7. So we could Ob Nixilis and try to kill the Jace. Let's see what happens. And we could Imprison in the Moon one of the 2 Wandering Fumaroles. But I think we can wait until next turn to do that and sacrifice a clue here. Since we don't really care if Ob Nixilis dies, if our opponent spends 5 mana to animate Fumarole and attack Ob Nixilis, they might not have a way to deal with the Awoken Horror. And imprisoning one of the Fumaroles still means that the second one can attack Ob Nixilis. So the opponent drew a lot of extra lands this game compared to us, which in some games is an advantage, but in this game ended up being pretty bad for them. End of turn, sack a clue. Alright, Tamiyo's Journal, it's not a bad one. So I think here we imprison the Fumarole and see what happens. Insidious Will as protection for their last card should be enough. Alright, looks like that did the job. So now their land can't turn into a creature and Thing in the Eyes can close out the game. And even if the opponent did have an answer for Thing in the Eyes, we had a lot of resources left to draw more cards. So yeah, was a kind of a weird game. A control mirror is not something you see very often, but on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which I think is keepable. We've got 2 telling times to hopefully find us more lands. We've got a counter spells and removal. So I think this is a keep. And hopefully our opponent doesn't kill us before we can stabilize here. Red-white could be a vehicles deck, but we do have Grasp and Murder, so even against aggressive starts we've got some ways to answer creatures. Alright, Veteran Motorist is gonna allow them to scry 2. But next turn we can either use Grasp or Telling Time. We found a 3rd land, which is nice. So, looking pretty good here. Of course, something like a Resolved Planeswalker, if we have to use a removal spell at some point, could be an issue. So we might have to, next turn, perhaps take a hit from a creature before killing it. PNLR, alright, can't counter that. It's gonna make a Thopter, so that's a bit annoying, since we have mostly 1/1 removal spells. So let's use a Grasp on the Motorist, so we don't take 3. Alright, now we can just say go, sit on our Telling Time, Concentration and Murder. So if the opponent wants to play around a counterspell by using, let's say, Pia's ability, then we can just Murder Pia end of turn or Telling Time end of turn. If they try and cast something scary, we can counter it. If they just play another creature, we might also just murder it. So Toolcraft Exemplar is fine. Don't want to spend a counterspell on that. And now Selfless Spirits. means their creatures would be indestructible if they sacrifice a spirit, so we have to choose now if we want a Telling Time looking for a Languish, which would solve this board nicely, or if we want to murder the Pia right now, or perhaps even the Thopter, that way the Toolcraft Exemplar doesn't get the bonus. I think we murder the Pia here in response. Of course, if we Telling Time find Languish, that would solve the board quite nicely, but with only 2 copies of Languish, I don't think I want to risk it. So now the opponent only hits us for 1, but next turn the Exemplar will get the bonus. Could have also countered the Selfless Spirit here, but I think cards like Vehicles and Planeswalkers are more problematic. So we find another counter. So we're gonna get hit for 3, 4, 5, 6 next turn, which is a lot. So these Telling Times need to find something good for us. Ether Hub. And yeah, that's gonna get countered. Fleet Wheel Cruiser would have hit us for 5, but we're still gonna take 6. And Torrrential Gearhulk is a nice card, but not one you want to have early in the game. Also, we need to hit some land drops to get up to 6 mana. Glimmer is not really what we need, so we could sit back on the concentration, or we can Telling Time right now to try and hit a land drop. I think we still sit on the concentration in case our opponent has maybe a Planeswalker like Gideon or Chandra. But it does mean we take another 6 points of damage, which is not ideal. And if the opponent doesn't have anything, alright, this one we have to counter as well. Unless we say we have to draw a Languish here no matter what to try and win the game. And in that case we would have to Telling Time and hit land plus Languish, which I think is probably not gonna happen here, so let's concentration that, and if we don't find a land we probably have to Telling Time main phase, because now our opponent has a lethal on board. Jace can block one of the opponent's creatures, but we're still gonna Telling Time here to try and find something, either a land or... Alright, so we found Swamp plus Grasp, which is nice. Definitely putting the Swamp on top. And then the Grasp, so we can play the Jace. And so this would chump the Exemplar. We take 4, 5, down to 2. But then we know that we're gonna draw a Grasp, which is not gonna win us the game. So we're still kind of in trouble here. And if we Telling Time, we're just dead on board. So I think we can't win this game anymore, since the Grasp is not going to be good enough. If the opponent hadn't played the Inventor's Apprentice, then we could have taken 6, and then next turn Jace transforming would have been decent. But now it's looking pretty bad for us, since we needed to draw a Languish here, but we know that's not gonna happen. So got kind of stuck on 3 lands here. Maybe if we managed to cast a Glimmer of Genius, we would have been able to draw into something good. Let's take a look at our top cards to see if we were gonna hit a Languish. We were. Essence Extraction actually not bad, but also not a card we can cast here. So yeah, I mean, a close game. Opponent had an explosive start, and we weren't able to deal with it properly. Guess we can say go and hope that they don't attack with everyone, but that's pretty unlikely. Grasp does get around Selfless Spirit, so their creatures being indestructible doesn't help against Grasp of Darkness. So let's see if they turn everyone sideways. They do. So we can grasp the Renegade Freighter before it gets +1/+1, but we still take a lethal damage. Our opponent sacrificing the spirit does not do anything. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is a bit awkward since we've got 2 of the late game cards in hand already. But I think we kind of have to keep here. We've got a Jace, which if he survives is going to be great. We've got some lands, so... Alright, Glimmer is a nice one. If we hit a 4th land. Blue-red means Jace is probably not gonna stay around for long, but one can hope. And Dispel. So I'm actually tempted to wait here before we play Jace, so we have Dispel protection up. Because if we play him right now, he's just gonna get killed by a random burn spell. While if we wait, we might be able to play Jace and protect him with Dispel. Alright, I did not expect a Caravan. Ob Nixilis. Alright, so don't have really any other option here. Play Jace. Opponent could still use a Caravan to use a 1-mana removal spell, but doesn't look like it. So this might also just be some sort of artifact, a Metalwork Colossus deck for all we know. For mana, Fleetwheel Cruiser. It's gonna hit us for 5. But hopefully this means Jay survives, so we can start hitting more land drops. Alright, so we could play the Boneyard here, but I would prefer to hit an untapped land, so we can play the Glimmer. Alright, that's good. So what do we discard? I don't think we'll have time for Tamiyo's Journal this game, unfortunately. Languish might come in handy as our only removal spell, and Ob Nixilis can also tag a creature. So let's discard a Journal, play an island, and say go. Now we have a Dispel and a Glimmer up. Unfortunately, don't have a counterspell for a creature, so if our opponent plays a creature and crews a vehicle, we'll take a lot of damage, and can't really prevent that. Alright, so this definitely looks like a Metalwork Colossus deck with lots of non-creature artifacts. So let's Glimmer. Confirm Suspicions and Telling Time. Yeah, I don't hate either of these. Suspicions might be a turn slow, but I think we still take both, since that gives us our first counterspell. And Jace. Alright, so I think we just play a tap land and say go. Could also loot with Jace first to get some more information, which might not be bad. We found another Glimmer, which is not bad. So I think we can discard Languish. Opponent doesn't strike me as an aggressive creature deck with lots of creatures. And yeah, play a Boneyard and say go. We can transform Jace next turn. Alright, Incendiary Sabotage is an instant, so we could counter this. And I think I'm going to. So would have just killed our Jace. We can still Telling Time. Alright, so don't have another Dispel, so Telling Timing right now doesn't do anything, so might as well represent a counterspell for whatever our opponent might have. And they don't have any creatures at the moment, so the vehicles aren't doing much. Alright, I like all of these counterspells. Grasp is also not bad. Let's see, I think I'll just take the Insidious Will though. And then keep the Grasp on top. Imprisoned doesn't enchant artifacts, so we could try and resolve one of our Planeswalkers. Or we can just sit on Glimmer plus counterspells, which I think is better. Since if our opponent plays a creature, we just counter it. Would only be awkward if our opponent plays 2 creatures here. But then our Planeswalkers would also die to the vehicles, so Glimmer end of turn. Still no lands. Could take Thing in the Ice, but we already have enough win conditions in hand. Just want to hit land drops, and Murder is not bad, but we already have a Grasp, so put both on the bottom, draw Murder and an island. Now a Swamp, alright. So these are all good. And now we also have Torrrential Gearhulk up, so no need to tap out for a Planeswalker. And I think we'll discard probably the Grasp of Darkness. Still have a Murder. So the plan here is if our opponent plays something big, we can confirm Suspicions, otherwise we're gonna Gearhulk end of turn. And also get a Glimmer of Genius to draw some more cards. Harness Lightning. And they must have a second burn spell as well here. And their own Torrential Gearhulk. Alright, that's not bad. And another Harness Lightning. Still get to Glimmer. And we have plenty of answers for the opponent's Gearhulk. I think I'll take one land here, put the other one on the bottom. Found 2 lands anyways. Alright, now we've got plenty of lands. So let's play the Sunken Hollow. Let's see, we can only play a Planeswalker and not keep up counter mana, so I think we say go. Let our opponent hit us for 5, whether it be with the Gearhulk or one of the vehicles. And then we try and kill it end of turn. Opponent's gonna go with the Cruiser. That's fine. We'll take 5. And another Caravan doesn't do anything. Guess we could have confirmed Suspicions that, but then we couldn't have murdered. I think this is fine. Alright, Extraction. So let's see, 5. So I think we'll wait one more turn to go with one of these Planeswalkers. Opponent doesn't have any pressure in play. And next turn we can play a Planeswalker plus keep up Insidious Will. If they have something worth countering here, we can just use Confirm Suspicions. Alright, so now I think we go with the Jace over Ob Nixilis. And that works. And I guess we keep that on top. In case we don't have anything to do with our mana, we can Telling Time. It's probably better than a random card. So now hopefully our opponent doesn't have two great creatures. Glyn as Crane, can't crew any of the vehicles, so that's fine. Even though it could find something scary. And we can also Essence Extraction it end of turn. So the opponent looking at the top 4. They probably have a number of artifacts. Thraben Gargoyle, not a problem. So opponent tries to play the Gargoyle, and Gargoyle plus Crane would be able to crew one of the vehicles, and the Gargoyle itself can also crew the Cruiser. So could use the Insidious Will here. And I think I will, no pun intended. Now hopefully our opponent doesn't have a big scary card in hand, which they do kind of. Can deal 3 to our Jace with a Sky Sovereign, but still no creatures to crew it, so it's kind of okay, I guess. Now we've got counters up. So let's cry first. Bottom. So we can, let's see, play Ob Nixilis and keep up Confirmed Suspicions. I think that's fine. And the Crane by itself isn't doing much, so we can keep that one in play. Languish is nice to have, I guess. So we'll let the Crane hit us, and then end of turn probably just Extraction the Crane. Alright, so this one, Metal War Colossus. So opponent can get it back from the graveyard, but they have to sacrifice 2 artifacts in order to do that. So let's, I guess, Suspicions this, since Concentration still doesn't leave up enough mana to use the Extraction. So the opponent can sacrifice 2 artifacts to get it back. And then they can recast it. And then they could crew the Sky Sovereign with the Colossus to kill Ob Nixilis. And then we would have a difficult time answering the Colossus, I guess. So their opponent gets the Colossus back, they can still play it. And now we're gonna see Sky Sovereign getting crewed, and I guess our opponent can actually kill both Planeswalkers because they also have this Crane that can hit for 1, plus the 3 damage from the Sky Sovereign. So alright, so our opponent's actually kind of doing it. So we lose both Planeswalkers, and our cards in hand don't quite answer the Metal War Colossus. So, kind of worked out nicely. So we're gonna have to find an answer to the Colossus pretty much. Another murder would be nice. So I think we Telling Time first here. Alright, there we go. And a Thing in the Ice. So we can sack a clue, play Thing in the Ice. So sack a clue, play Thing in the Ice, play a murder. But then we don't have enough to also Extraction the Crane. But I think I want to play the Thing in the Ice first here, just to get a counter off of it. And I want to murder the Colossus now, so their opponent can't crew a vehicle in response. So if our opponent top decks another big creature, that would be awkward. But if we survive this turn, I think our chances are pretty good. Because if our opponent sacks 2 artifacts, then they can't replay the Colossus. Smuggler's Copter, alright, that's actually not great for us, because they can crew that with the Crane, then crew the Sky Sovereign with the Copter. And we get hit for 6. But once we deal with the Crane, we've got Broken Concentration. So Sky Sovereign can't deal damage to players, only to planeswalkers and creatures. So they can't also kill the thing in the ice, luckily. But we do take 6. And might as well sack a clue here end of turn. Opponent could also sacrifice a number of artifacts to get the Colossus back, but they can do that at any point. Grasp of Darkness could be useful. Alright, so let's start by, I think, extracting the Crane, so they can't crew the Copter anymore. Also gains us some life. And I think we can sack the clue just to see what we would draw. Another counter is good. Alright, so pretty much have to counter our opponent's creatures to prevent any crewing from happening. That's an interesting twist. So I don't think we want that to resolve. So let's counter it. 1 counter left on the thing in the ice. So we could grasp our own thing just to transform it. But yeah, this is much better. Could also keep our instance in hand so we can transform the thing in the ice to bounce the opponent's creatures. But I think it's better to go for it now to apply some pressure. We still have a grasp to shrink down the opponent's creatures. Plus a Broken Concentration. Alright, these are all good. Disciple and Scatter. And let's see, I think we can play the Disciple here and then just control the board with the Disciple. Plus we still have our Broken Concentration available. Foundry Inspector. So I think it's fine to counter it. Since the opponent can't play the Colossus, let's see, 5 + 4. Yeah, let's counter that. Opponent can't replay the Colossus this turn. And now we have our opponent dead with what we have in play. Alright, sweet. A long game. Almost managed to lose it despite having a full hand, but Metal War Colossus being able to come back from the graveyard is pretty scary. against the control deck. So now we can start using these abilities a bunch. Exile some instants or sorceries. And it doesn't really matter what we exile here since the game's over, otherwise we don't want to exile a number of cards. Alright, that should do it. Opponent takes 13. I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay, and as always, have a nice day.